understand what he's doing.
My friend Anne-Louise, here in front of her house, lives in a suburb of Paris called Noisy-le-Sec.
Allô, vous m'entendez?
We were waiting for a car to the
Hello?
city because the
Je vous entends pas
RER
du
from
tout.
Noisy-le-Sec
Je
was
sais pas si
down
vous
for the
m'entendez.
weekend, and the bus to Metro to get to the
Je
very
vous entends
eastern
pas.
edge of Paris would have taken an hour and a half. And we had gotten a very late start because we were stupid and naive about what we were planning to
No, I
do,
called him.
which was
But
walk
then it was
across
just like
Paris in a
silent.
zigzag fashion by crossing every bridge over the Seine within the
His
city
name was
limits.
Alexandre Jean Louis.
We believed it would take about 2 hours, and we could stop and visit little landmarks and eat at restaurants along the way. This would not ultimately be the case. But here, standing outside her house, I, for some reason, thought there were 19 bridges. She had absolutely no idea how many there were. We didn't even think to count or calculate anything until we were getting in the car, lazily, at 1 p.m. We started in the east, where the bridges were weird and barren. At this east end of Paris, the bridge looked like a generic bridge over an industrial waterway. It was free of any associations with Paris. It looked like nothing. We were so excited to start.
Then we go that way?
It looks like we're in a different city.
Anne-Louise told me when she first moved here, she would come to this neighborhood with an American who had never had a job at 4 or 5 a.m. on acid. She used to live with me in New York. On our lunch breaks around Union Square, from the Strand, me, and Lapham's Quarterly, her, we would walk around the East Village sharing a pair of headphones, watching and listening to Fiona Apple's cover of I Want You by Elvis Costello, running into people, walking out into the street at the wrong times, holding each other and laughing, understanding we were being pieces of shit, but we couldn't not do it. If we weren't listening to the Fiona Apple or talking about what the Fiona Apple meant to us, we were talking about a really fucked up idea we had about vulnerability, which still, over a decade later, pollutes many of the ways we interact with people, men especially. We believed that the goal was to be as vulnerable as possible, which, no, it's not. But even if it were, our understanding of vulnerability was broken and punishing. We thought vulnerability meant you should take anything that someone presented you with total understanding. We thought it was our job as women to be vessels of understanding, of believing the excuses, of seeing the good in people, of giving shitty people the benefit of the doubt. One of the problems with this is that if you follow this logic and something goes wrong or reality suddenly fucks you over and shocks you into a kind of submission to pain, it can only be your fault for not understanding well enough. Our understanding was abused by men left and right, and why wouldn't it be? I was completely understanding of my boyfriend who absolutely hated my guts and cheated on me constantly. She was completely understanding of the ones who kissed other women in front of her at the party. It sounds awful, but we were, in our way, having the time of our lives. In our very early 20s, returning to the sidewalks with our headphones, going over everything new and boundless we had understood in the past 24 hours, astonishing each other with our vulnerability scope. We felt so powerful on those walks. When we walked together, there was nothing we couldn't figure out. When it was winter, when it was summer, when we walked together, we knew everything, because each of us separately knew half of everything, and we could help the other deepen their understanding, and the two ends of the circle could connect. I don't think the power we were collecting was either positive or negative. It just existed and was potent, like nuclear energy. Yeah. All right. Shall we?
Let's do it. Wait, should we walk this way or in the middle? No, that's biking, maybe. We can see it better.
Or the other side.
I think this is good.
It will all work out, especially like, I don't know, he's all over the place and you are too. Like, you don't want to, I don't know what you want, but
And I think also what you want changes, right?
yeah, definitely.
So, like, there's no really...
Yeah.
We're not worried about it. This is my favorite.
When my parents got divorced when I was 9 in South Mississippi, I decided I needed to have a Paris-themed bedroom at my mom's house, though my only exposure to Paris at that point would have been movies. And by movies, I mean 101 Dalmatians, both the animated and live-action versions. In any case, I was a Francophile. This amounted to an Eiffel Tower lamp, a throw pillow which said I'd rather be in Paris, and a large photo book from TJ Maxx called Paris, in all caps. As a child and then as a teenager, I experienced a strange cocktail of loneliness and believing my loneliness came partially from being quote unquote better than my surroundings. Smarter, more elegant somehow, even though there was nothing in my life reflecting that idea back to me. Because at the same time, I felt ugly and worthless. And I had every kind of eating disorder it's possible to have, and no boys ever liked me because I was not as hot as my friends, but I secretly thought I was, and that it would one day be recognized, maybe in Paris. It's beside the point and hard to define. I just thought I belonged in Paris. In adulthood, I met other people who were strange Francophile children from the American provinces. Some of them had more contact with French culture than I did. I had never seen a baguette. We had something called French bread on the Gulf Coast, but it was not a baguette. And I certainly knew no distinction between France at large and Paris specifically. Could it have been Pepe Le Pew, or mimes, or perfume ads that made me want to be in Paris? These other childhood Francophiles from places like Pittsburgh and San Antonio were crucial to me at college because they introduced me to more information about the place I shaped myself toward loving. In New York, Andy introduced me to the French New Wave. Breathless, A Band Apart, Anna Karina, Brigitte Bardot, all those bitches. I smeared eyeliner all over my eyelids. I kept my hair messy. What I hated about Paris when I finally got there was that I was nothing like the movie I thought I was about to be in. What I hated about Paris was myself.
It's like an electric cable, like, in water.
Down by the water, looking at the power line, or whatever it was, we had considered climbing up this very steep little staircase because it looked like fun. But we decided not to because I had already fallen down the stairs at Anne Louise's house the day before and fallen down the stairs at Karina's house the day before that, so we weren't feeling good about it. We went the other way. And when we got to the top, we were happy because this group of people had just crawled up the steep little stairs, and one of the three of them, the man, had gotten human shit all over him somehow. We watched awkwardly as they tried to get it off. One of my favorite novels, the only novel written by the greatest poet to ever live, Rainer Maria Rilke, takes place in Paris. I once listened to a podcast where the host said George Jones is the unequivocal greatest country singer to ever live. And I really loved that because it's his podcast, so he can say things like that if he wants. So this is my movie, and Rilke is the unequivocal greatest poet to ever live. So the novel is called The Notebooks of Malte Laurids Brygge. It's about a Danish man who moves to Paris, away from the provinces where he grew up with his rich family. A man who wants to experience life, I guess. Rilke himself had moved from Worpswede, a German arts colony in the country, to Paris, in order to work with the sculptor Rodin. He wrote to his lover and confidant, Lou Andreas Salome, that being in Paris made him feel a nearly unbearably intense fear and anxiety all the time. He said he felt like it was his duty to make something out of the fear, out of the anguish, so he decided to make this novel. It's a fragmented, plotless, batshit insane novel about a man who moves to Paris and begins to feel a nearly unbearably intense fear and anxiety all the time. I will now read the first fragment, which I love. September 11th, Rue Toyer. This, then, is where people come to live. I'd have thought it more of a place to die. I have been out. I saw hospitals. I saw one man who tottered and then collapsed. People gathered around him, which spared me the rest. I saw a pregnant woman. She was inching ponderously along by a high, sun-warmed wall, occasionally touching it as if seeking assurance that it was still there. Yes, it was still there. And behind the wall, I located it on my map. Maison d'accouchement. Very well. She will be delivered of her child. That is where their skill lies. Further on, Rue Saint-Jacques, a large building with a cupola. The map read, Val-de-Grâce, military hospital. That I did not need to know, but it does no harm. The street began to smell from all sides. As far as I could distinguish the odors, it smelled of idioform, the fat in which pommes frites are fried, and fear. Every city reeks in summer. Then I saw a building curiously blinded with cataracts, unmarked on the map, though the words over the door were still quite legible. Asile de nuit. Beside the entrance was the tariff of charges. I read it through. It was not expensive. What else? A baby in a halted pram, plump, greenish, with quite a rash on its forehead. The rash was clearly healing and not painful. The child was asleep. Its mouth hung open. It was breathing in idioform, pommes frites, fear. That was simply the way it was. The main thing was to be living. That was the main thing.
Oh.
Rilke said, try to say what you see, and I always try. And it's not so easy. Instead, we often say what we feel, what we guess, what we extrapolate from what we see. Writing this novel almost killed Rilke, who was deathly ill by the time he left Paris, physically and mentally. He wrote to Lou Salome that he felt he needed to quit writing, to perhaps go to medical school. That writing Malte Laurids Brygge broke him in some fundamental way. And Paris. In many introductions to his works, the translator or editor mentions Rilke's excess of sensitivity. When he was writing, the idea of empathy was just coming into being. Not empathy itself, obviously, which has existed since life existed, I'm guessing, but it was the first time European thinkers were articulating this kind of transmission of feeling, this ability that we have. They were calling it in-seeing, probably in some cool German word formulation. Rilke used in-seeing as a way to write poems, visiting the animals in the zoos in Paris, sitting there, staring at them until he felt their interior revealed itself to him. He did it with objects. He wanted to listen to the interior of things. I'm not a historian, but a poet and a believer, and this is my movie. It seemed Rilke suffered from an inability to limit empathy in a healthy way. When he witnessed other people's suffering, he suffered and could think of nothing else and was physically weakened by it. He was never able to live in cities, and the modern world encroaching on him made him retreat, ultimately, to remote castles he borrowed from his friends. He happened to be friends with a lot of princesses. Rilke's empathy problem reminds me of a story Anne Louise once told me about going to see 12 Years a Slave in New York with our friend Laura and her younger brother Charles, who is an extremely sensitive person. About a quarter of the way into the movie, witnessing this recreated depiction of the extreme violence enacted by white slave owners on the slaves in the film, Charles had a seizure and passed out. They had to stop the movie so an ambulance could come. They turned on the lights, told everyone to go home, and gave them their money back. He had psychosomatically responded to the suffering he saw, even though he knew logically it was only a simulation of the real violence enacted on real people who experienced unspeakable suffering. I always think of this moment when I think of Rilke trying to live in cities, surrounded by the suffering that is everywhere but becomes evident when a huge amount of people live very close together. This is one of the reasons people didn't like Rilke at the time. He couldn't stand the suffering of others, so he retreated from it. He didn't approach the problems. He didn't try to help. The other reason people didn't like Rilke at the time is because he abandoned his wife and child. But I wasn't there, and I don't know why he had to do that. Here we are having some famous ice cream.
It actually tastes like rose.
I know. And here is a G-Wagon.
Oh. Oh my god, this used to be a bar. It was so cool. That's sad. There was a downstairs and they had like jazz and live music.
I was in Paris on my 21st birthday. I was studying abroad like so many other kids with rich dads, and like so many other kids with rich dads, I had a drinking problem. The problem was not exactly alcoholism, but that I would get as drunk as I could, as fast as I could, whenever I could. The night of my 21st birthday, I was invited to a party at a beautiful apartment on the top floor of a building. It, like everything in Paris, looked like a set from a movie. The windows going out onto a small balcony, lights twinkling. It was what love was supposed to look like. We had all been taught this from an extremely young age. I got so drunk at this party, which was, unlike most parties any of the Americans were invited to, at a French person's apartment, though it seems most people there were actually American. I got so drunk that I ended up puking in the toilet. All of these other American students from my school were hovering around me watching. I did something which, in hindsight, I do understand is completely disgusting. I splashed toilet water on my face and rinsed my mouth with it because I thought I was dying. I honestly did not realize for a long time toilet water was disgusting. I had grown up in close proximity with it, what with the eating disorders and forced puking. And nobody had ever bothered to tell me it was filthy because I guess people don't usually get so close to it, and parents don't think they need to tell their kids that toilet water is fucking foul. Miraculously, at age 21, I believed it was like water from a faucet. I hesitate to include this in the film because it might cause people to think about nothing else for the entire time. But after that, I snuck into the kitchen and ate some honey on honeycomb. Probably everyone could see me, and I just felt like I was sneaking. The next day at school, everyone was saying that I drank toilet water. And they were like, "Are you okay? I heard you drink toilet water." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I'm fine, but this sucks." As we approached Notre Dame, the souvenirs were everywhere. My mom, sister, and I had visited the cathedral when they came to Paris at the end of my time studying here, which was a harrowing, terrible trip, in part because by the time they got here, I had let a cold or flu get so out of hand by being unsure of how to navigate the medical resources, and because of my own insane disbelief in doctors or medicine's ability to do anything, that I was coughing up blood on the living room cot, and my ribs hurt so badly that I couldn't really talk or laugh. Carmela Soprano came here too. Everyone comes to Notre Dame. And of course, we all remember when it burned down and everyone made their Facebook profile picture and Instagram avatar have something to do with Notre Dame. How people showed their asses so completely by grieving in these weepy posts about an old church that was basically on the verge of burning down anyway, as if that was the fire that mattered, the one that said the world was ending, because they had once been there and taken a photo. But it does mean something to go to Paris. I mean, I had the pillow. I'd rather be in Paris, sitting on my bed in Gulfport, Mississippi. It meant something to me, too. It meant something to Carmela Soprano, who was essentially a real person, who had at that point in the series recently started up an emotional affair with a professor of French literature. He had given her a copy of the letters of Abelard and Eloise, letters exchanged in the 12th century in France between a famed theologian and his young pupil during their ill-fated love affair. It's often called an ill-fated love affair, but what happened is Abelard got Eloise pregnant and sent her away to a different abbey and then refused to engage with her romantically anymore, forcing her into a monastic life she didn't really want because she still wanted him. And he was castrated, so he wouldn't want to fuck anyone ever again. Most copies of the letters of Abelard and Eloise begin with Abelard's version of the story, his Historia Calamitatum, Latin for the calamitous story, in which he confesses his meteoric rise as a medieval thinker and then his downfall, his inability to resist the young abbess, Eloise, who he seduced and then abandoned. They are culturally regarded as scandalous, passionate, explicitly sexual letters between ill-fated lovers, so of course I read them. But they aren't very hot at all, and I stopped reading when they got into pure religious philosophy, without the illegal sex that made it bearable. Plus, Abelard gets castrated, as I mentioned. That isn't very hot to me. I quit reading, but I do love the way he introduces Eloise in the Historia Calamitatum. I began to think myself the only philosopher in the world, with nothing to fear from anyone, and so I yielded to the lust of the flesh. There was in Paris at the time a young girl named Eloise. There was in Paris at the time a young girl called Eloise. What an entrance. Anne-Louise ran across traffic to get us food, but I was too scared to cross, so I watched from safety and wondered what she'd buy. She bought something called a ham Caesar sandwich and a ham and cheese croissant. Most of the other American students were taking bullshit classes in order to have an excuse to be in Paris, but my degree was in French literature, so I was in Paris doing most of my degree's coursework. This meant I spent most of my time laying on the living room cot, which I got instead of a bedroom because of drawing straws and getting the shortest one, reading novels in French, several of them in archaic forms of French with dead tenses. This was fine with me because I quickly realized I didn't like Paris very much. I wasn't bothered by the French people's distaste for me. I expected it. I became disturbed by what I perceived as their attitude toward each other. It didn't seem like anyone was having fun. Maybe they were having lively conversations, but it didn't seem like they had any sort of good feeling toward one another. It made me sad, so I didn't mind reading on the little bed. It wasn't my first experience of liking reading more than living.
There's a sign that says Pont des Arts, but...
My favorite course was French literature from the Middle Ages to the 19th century. My teacher was a very old man who had very few teeth and had apparently had some sort of palsy at some point because the muscles in half of his face remained slack all the time. This caused him to spit and wipe his mouth constantly with a white handkerchief as he spoke. This all made his French, which I was still learning, which by this time in my academic career I could just finally understand in real time, extremely difficult to understand. The palsied facial muscles and the spitting, thankfully, did not deter this professor, whose name I've forgotten, from speaking enthusiastically about the literature he so clearly loved. He seemed like the only truly happy Parisian. And his love for the literature was infectious. Here are some of the dumbass locks that were sinking this bridge.
Let it go, let it go. I don't want to go into the sky. Let it go, let it go. You'll never see me crying. Here I stand, and here I stay. Let the storm break your heart.
We read Rabelais and I fell in love with the giants from the story, who were so large because they were humanist metaphors, emphasizing the potential value and goodness of human beings. With man at the center of the world, of the story, why not make the men huge and funny? I just fell in love with the giants, Pantagruel and his father Gargantua. At the end of the quest, drink. And what the giant instructs us to drink is just more knowledge. Voltaire's Candide and Pangloss. We must cultivate our garden. Diderot's Encyclopedia, the first methodical endeavor to determine and present the entire scope of human knowledge. I cried that morning, listening to this man tell me about this first methodical endeavor, a time when people actually believed that to amass everything we knew would make the world better. I couldn't imagine how great it would feel to believe that, and then contribute to the cause, to invent the encyclopedia for the love of mankind. I just fell in love with the Knights of the Round Table, with the Songs of the Rose, with Excalibur and the Grail and Percival going into the woods to grow up. I fell in love with Lachlo and the Dangerous Liaisons. This was my morning class. After lunch, everything beautiful was torn back down in my 19th century to contemporary French course. The wars had come, and with them existentialism and cynicism and whatever else the fuck it was called. I didn't like this course as much. I know that these are the philosophies that many young people latch onto, the ones where the world disassembles itself before our eyes and there is no meaning. But I wanted meaning. I believed there was meaning in amassing information and sharing it with one another. I think I still believe that. I thought there was a light, and I liked walking in it all morning. But then it was journey to the end of the night, la nausée, the stranger, the loneliness and alienation. Then I went home to eat a demi-baguette with mustard, avocado, and tomatoes, and get back to reading, to prepare for the next day of building up the world through enlightenment, then breaking it back down with the individual, the abyss, the impossible gulch between us all.
Port bush.
Yeah. I love these flat trees. I wondered if anyone famous had ever drowned in this water, so I Googled it and discovered L'Inconnue de la Seine. In the late 1880s, an unidentified woman was pulled from the water. She was so beautiful, it's claimed, that a pathologist at the morgue felt it was his duty to preserve her beauty by casting a death mask. She looks like she's smiling, and it's been debated whether or not a drowned person could actually form that expression. In any case, copies of this death mask became a fashionable object used to decorate Parisian homes. She became the erotic ideal of the period. It was so popular in Europe that an entire generation of German girls fashioned themselves after her and modeled their looks after the drowned woman from the Seine. That is until Greta Garbo came along and took her place as the ideal European beauty. And then, further along the Wikipedia page, I see that Rilke wrote about her in the notebooks of Malte Laurids Brügge. Of course he did, because everything is connected. Malte writes, "The caster I visit every day has 2 masks hanging next to his door. The face of the young one who drowned, which someone copied in the morgue because it was beautiful, because it was still smiling, because its smile was so deceptive, as though it knew."
No, not at all.
Oh yeah. No, that's
A couple days before the bridges, Julian, Cash, and I had been walking down a street in the Marais when we saw an Instant Pot on the sidewalk. As we got closer, we saw that there was a pile of dog shit inside it. Julian started to take a picture of it, and Cash and I screamed, "No!" as soon as we saw him get the phone out. While this was happening, a young man smoking a cigarette outside of a bar was watching us. He said, "That's human shit. It happened today." I had to move the Instant Pot. Someone shit in it. I saw the man shitting in it. He was French, but he spoke English for us. "That was human shit?" Julian said, now regretting the photo. "Yes. Welcome to Paris," the man said.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I liked about the Rabelais. The humor was all about belching and farting and shitting and pissing and sex. It was totally disgusting. The humans of humanism were giants, but they were also disgusting like humans, gigantically so. I saw this pink thing on the water and asked Anne-Louise what it was. I wanted to go there really badly because it looked very exciting. And we were losing battery on the camera, so we did have to stop to charge it. She explained it was a club and that she did not want to go there. This made me want to go there even more. But she insisted there was a better place at the cafe in the Petit Palais. Still, I held out hope. The cafe in the Petit Palais was closed. I maintained that I was right about going to the pink place. She maintains she was still right to go to the Petit Palais because I got such beautiful footage of the rain hitting the pink flowers in the atrium. We did leave the Seine for an errand, which I did not film because it wasn't part of this project.
Should we go?
I say errand, but that indicates a kind of necessity. This was an Anne Louise style errand. We had to go to an umbrella shop that her parents had been to on their honeymoon in the 80s. Anne Louise wanted to buy a nice umbrella at the same shop. We found the place, which was a tiny shop with mirrored walls. I could not get away from my reflection. And the woman who worked there said she may have even been the one to sell Anne Louise's parents their umbrella. She kept correcting Anne Louise's French,
Oh, God.
not in an annoying way. Sometimes she even explained why the words were feminine or masculine, or where the word came from in the Latin. I could understand her, but I did not dare say a word in the store, because as you know by now, my friend's pronunciation
See anything?
is inconsistent and pretty insane.
Yes.
Anne Louise bought a waxed linen umbrella with a wooden handle made in France. The woman was very pleased by her selection. It cost 100 euros. The woman explained, because it's French. There is no better design or quality. I, on the other hand, chose an umbrella made from brown and black synthetic material with a plastic handle. She let me know that it was an inferior product because it was made in Spain. A specialized umbrella errand is very much in the character of Anne Louise, who once purchased one of those little candle holders with a little round place to grab it for carrying, because she thought she might want to use that when she had to get up from bed to go to the bathroom, instead of lighting the way with her phone like a normal person. Our friends together told her she couldn't do that because she was going to burn down her house, and we didn't want her to die that way, even though that too would be in her character.
Okay.
It's possible I hated Paris so much when I first went there because I don't care about a great deal of Parisian culture. I don't care about food or wine. I don't care about indulgence or quality or tradition. I like bright, garish things and irony and trash and obnoxious, loud people. And what I saw was a kind of tasteful, curated casualness that I found depressing. But it was most probably because I just hated myself. And these were just the things I told myself to get around that fact. I spent a lot of time on the living room cot looking at the Facebook page of a man called Alex, who I went to high school with. He lived in New Orleans by then. Alex had been one of my only admirers in high school. He was an artist, a drummer, and a weirdo, which made me afraid of him. He petted my hair in the hallways and called me his Amazon woman because I was 6 inches taller than him. He asked me to go to prom. I said I would, but I simply wasn't interested in going to prom, so I couldn't. When prom rolled around, my friends and I were getting drunk in my garage and realized, oh my God, prom is happening right now. Wouldn't it be so funny if we just went, just how we are, with no makeup, looking like shit? We drunk drove around to each other's houses to put on each other's old homecoming dresses, and then showed up at prom, shit-faced. The first person I saw as I sort of stumbled into the gym wearing Anna's too tight, coral beaded homecoming dress was Alex, who was visibly crestfallen. I was so surprised. I hadn't meant to hurt his feelings, but I was too drunk to communicate the miscommunication, which ultimately would have been too cruel anyway. I had completely forgotten that he'd asked me, because I simply didn't care. I was so lonely in Paris that I started messaging him on Facebook, recalling one person who had once found me beautiful and worthy of love. It was so pathetic. After a while, his girlfriend, or someone, got on his profile and messaged me back. Oh, you're right. I'm still so in love with you, and I'd drop everything to have a chance to fuck you. Then another message. Get a fucking life. Well, I thought I had a life. I was living in Paris after all. That message is still burned into my retinas. and is forever, for me, a part of the City of Lights. In his fifth letter to a young poet, which is about Rome, not Paris, but which I think applies in its own way to Paris, Rilke laments the pressure one feels, bearing down from all sides, when in a city that has been visited and looked at so thoroughly and for so long by so many eyes, places like Rome or Paris that have been visited for the express purpose of looking. How it makes one feel stifled with sadness for the first few days, through the gloomy and lifeless museum atmosphere that it exhales, through the abundance of its pasts, which are brought forth and laboriously held up, through the terrible overvaluing, sustained by scholars and philologists and imitated by the ordinary tourist, of all these decaying things, which are nothing but accidental remains from another time and from a life that is not and should not be ours. He says after a while, though one may still be confused and overwhelmed, one can say to oneself, no, there is not more beauty here than in other places. And all these objects, which have been marveled at by generation after generation, mended and restored by the hands of workmen, mean nothing, are nothing, and have no heart and no value. But there is much beauty here, because everywhere there is much beauty. I think there's beauty when we can see the things around us from within our own lives, engage with them from our own realm of imagination. When we see a way to participate with what we see in a way that is gentle and comes naturally. Walking the bridges with a person who feels like an extension of myself was a way I found to participate with Paris. We had had the idea about 10 years before, walking out of the Palais de Tokyo. We have both seen each other go so crazy so many times over the years. That time, when we went to Palais de Tokyo, I had been trying to re-seduce the same boyfriend who hated me and cheated on me. This was a guy who barely ever brushed his teeth and who was cheating on his current girlfriend with me. She held my hand while I cried in bed over a white wrapper I was in love with at the bookstore where I worked, who also smelled bad. At my bachelorette party, 3 nights before I got married to a mean poet, Anne Louise sat next to me on the floor while I was in the clawfoot tub and was the only person to warn me. "You shouldn't do this," she said. "Why not?" I asked, drunkenly. "Because you're in love with someone else?" she said. "No, I'm not," I said. But of course, yes, I was. And I was getting married as a way to punish that person. Anne Louise has done her own fucked up things, and was, in fact, at the time of our bridge walking, at the beginning of a property dispute over the house she and her ex-boyfriend bought together in Noisy-le-Sec. But mostly, her business should remain her business. It was great to be in Paris with her again. This time, I was in love with no one, so nobody could fuck with me. A feeling that lasted about 2 more weeks, because after walking these bridges and returning to New York, I got obsessed with someone else. And it was taking forever to make this journey. Soon after we started, we realized we wouldn't be able to stop and sit down anywhere. We realized if we sat down, we might not get back up and keep walking. So while I don't care about Parisian culture, I do care about making something. And I care about those who made something before, and about the ones who managed to make something here in Paris, especially when they made it out of their fear or their anxiety or their fucked up love or their memory or their confusion about life. Chris Marker, Agnes Varda, Baudelaire, The Flowers of Evil, Paris Spleen, Verlaine and Rimbaud, Simone de Beauvoir, The Destroyed Woman, Chantal Ackerman, Chantal Ackerman's mother, Sophie Calle, Jean-Paul Belmondo, Jean-Luc Godard, Apollinaire, who Frank O'Hara loved, so I loved, Pierre Reverdy, who Frank O'Hara loved, so I loved, without ever reading a single word, Rabelais, Céline, Chrétien de Troyes, The Song of the Rose, The Troubadours. Are you kidding me? The Troubadours? Can you even imagine?
Let's at least look down.
The Holy Grail, Humanism, Diderot's Encyclopedia, Jean Cocteau, Orpheus, Death in Schiaparelli dipping her hands into liquid mercury, La Belle et la Bête, Rodin's sculpture of Balzac, and then Balzac. How every city sounds like sirens. Van Gogh, but not exactly Van Gogh, because I think he was only in Paris for like 2 years. But the way the protagonist of Wittgenstein's Mistress says, poor Van Gogh. Proust, poor Proust. That is the end for me, Proust. The day Anne Louise left New York to live and work in Paris with her Swedish citizenship was one of the hardest days of my 20s. The night before, as a way to say goodbye, we gathered in her old apartment, got extremely drunk, and did a group reading of Macbeth. Anne Louise was Macbeth. I was Lady Macbeth.
That's port.
So the morning of her departure, we sat hungover in the apartment,
I can't find the name
all
of it.
packed up with her
Oh,
stuff
it's
in
up
boxes,
there.
and we both cried. She went downstairs to get Gatorade from the deli, and I sat there writing her a bunch of little poems on a piece of trash, which she still has somewhere, she claims. Bad, short poems written while crying. In one of them, I refer to an excerpt from Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters by J.D. Salinger, who I still love despite everything. It was about how, with Anne Louise gone, I couldn't think of anyone else I'd send to look for horses in my stead. It would take too long to explain what this means now. But there was no one else. There is just no one else I'd send out to look for horses in my stead. She's one of my emissaries, figures I imagine sending out into the narratives of the world in my place because she's better than me and she'd know what to do. After she moved to Paris, I moved into her old bedroom with the one accent wall she'd painted royal blue. It was so ugly, but I loved it.
Woo! And it's telling me we're gonna lose battery.
Wait, we got
Go. We have to. Okay, yeah, we have to make it across.
It had taken nearly 6 hours to walk all 27 bridges over the Seine. We had ultimately walked 14 miles. And Post Malone was still the background of my phone back then. And we ate steak and fries and drank champagne and wondered if the fancy people in the restaurant were disgusted by us because we were wind-burned and soaking wet from rain and sweat and happiness.
How does it feel?
So good. I feel really good. I'm so hungry.
Let's go eat. Okay, first of all, the best picture that I took of the Marry Me guy.
Where is he?
He's not in the picture.
Oh yeah.
My favorite pictures of the day. But then, I mean, it's part of it. Just a little.
Jasmin.